The real difference between rich and everyone else. By now, we've explored 10 of the most powerful investments that wealthy individuals use to grow their fortunes: stocks, real estate, businesses, private equity, technology, startups, dividends, intellectual property, and networks. Each of these investments can generate wealth on its own, but the real secret is not any single investment. The real secret is how the wealthy combine them together. Because rich people rarely rely on just one income source. Instead, they build financial ecosystems, multiple assets working together, multiple income streams, multiple layers of wealth. This is what allows their money to grow faster and faster over time. But to truly understand this system, we need to examine something deeper. We need to understand how wealthy investors think about money.
The psychology of wealth. Most people grow up believing that money is earned through work. You study, you get a job, you earn a salary, and hopefully you save some of that income. This model has worked for generations, but it has a limitation: time. There are only so many hours a person can work. Even high-paying careers are still limited by time. But wealthy investors approach money differently. They see money as a tool that can produce more money. Instead of focusing only on earning income, they focus on owning systems that generate income: a rental property, a stock portfolio, a business, a digital product. Each asset becomes a financial machine that produces cash flow. And once that machine is running, it can continue generating income even without constant effort. This shift in mindset changes everything. Instead of asking, "How can I make more money?" wealthy investors ask, "How can I build assets that make money for me?" This is one of the biggest mental differences between ordinary earners and wealthy investors.
How the rich build multiple streams of income. Another key principle wealthy individuals understand is diversification. Diversification simply means spreading investments across different assets. Why does this matter? Because every investment carries risk. Stocks can fall, businesses can fail, real estate markets can decline, technology trends can change. But when investors spread their capital across multiple investments, the overall system becomes stronger. If one investment struggles, others may continue growing. For example, a wealthy investor might own stocks in major companies, rental properties generating cash flow, a private business, startup investments, dividend-paying stocks, intellectual property assets. Each investment produces different types of returns. Some generate monthly income, others grow slowly over time. Some may deliver explosive returns. This mixture creates a powerful financial structure that continues growing even when parts of the economy change.
The power of compounding. Perhaps the most powerful force in investing is compound growth. Compounding occurs when investment returns begin generating their own returns. This effect may seem small at first, but over long periods, it becomes incredibly powerful. Consider an investor who earns 10% annually on an investment. After 1 year, a $10,000 investment becomes $11,000. The next year, the return's calculated on the larger amount. Year after year, the investment grows faster. Over decades, the results can become extraordinary. This is why long-term investors often outperform short-term traders. They allow compounding to work uninterrupted for many years. Even the legendary investor, Warren Buffett, built most of his wealth later in life. Although Buffett started investing in his youth, the majority of his fortune came after decades of compounding returns. Time turned his investments into a financial snowball that kept growing larger. This principle is one reason wealthy investors think in decades rather than months. They understand that patience can transform ordinary investments into extraordinary wealth.
The role of risk. Another major difference between wealthy investors and average earners is their relationship with risk. Many people try to avoid risk entirely, but experienced investors know that risk cannot be eliminated. It can only be managed. Every investment carries uncertainty, but risk also creates opportunity. When investors carefully analyze opportunities, they can take calculated risks that produce large rewards. This is especially true in startup investing and emerging industries. For example, early investors in companies like Tesla, Amazon, took significant risks when those companies were still unproven, but those risks eventually produced enormous returns. Successful investors are not gamblers, they are analysts. They study markets, they evaluate trends, and they make strategic decisions based on long-term potential. The importance of information. Another powerful advantage wealthy investors possess is access to information. Financial markets are heavily influenced by knowledge. The more information an investor has, the better their decisions can be. Large investment firms employ teams of analysts who study industries, companies, and global economic trends. These analysts examine financial reports, market conditions, and competitive landscapes. Their research helps investors identify opportunities before they become obvious to the public. Major investment institutions, such as Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, manage enormous amounts of capital, partly because they invest heavily in research and analysis. While ordinary investors may not have access to such large research teams, they can still benefit from learning how markets work. Education remains one of the most powerful investment tools available. The more someone understands about finance, economics, and business, the better equipped they become to identify opportunities. Financial systems and wealth. Beyond individual investments lies an even larger system, the global financial system. This system includes banks, stock markets, governments, and financial institutions that influence how money flows around the world. These institutions create the environment where investments grow. Central banks manage interest rates. Stock exchanges facilitate trading. Investment funds allocate billions of dollars into companies and assets. Major institutions like Federal Reserve, International Monetary Fund play powerful roles in shaping global economic conditions. Changes in interest rates, inflation, and monetary policy can dramatically affect investment markets. Experienced investors pay close attention to these signals. They understand that economic trends influence asset prices. When interest rates fall, borrowing becomes cheaper, often stimulating business growth and stock market expansion. When inflation rises, investors may shift towards assets that protect purchasing power. Understanding these dynamics allows investors to position their portfolios strategically. How wealth becomes generational. One of the most fascinating aspects of wealth is how it can become generational. Once an individual builds a large asset base, that wealth can continue growing long after the original investor is gone. Families establish trusts. They pass ownership of businesses and investments to future generations. Over time, these assets continue producing income. This is why some family fortunes last for centuries. The original wealth may have been created through business or investments, but careful management allows it to continue growing. Generational wealth is not just about money. It also involves financial education, mentorship, and strategic planning. When families understand how wealth works, they can preserve and expand it for future generations. Transition to final part. By now, we've uncovered the investments and strategies that wealthy individuals use to build financial empires. But there is still one final question. What separates those who know about these investments from those who actually build wealth with them? In the final part of this documentary, we will explore the habits that separate investors from dreamers, the biggest mistakes that keep people poor, and the final principle that turns investments into lasting financial freedom. The biggest mistake most people make with money. By now, we've explored the investments that wealthy individuals use to build enormous fortunes. But knowing these investments is only part of the story. Because many people understand these opportunities, yet very few actually become wealthy. Why? Because the biggest obstacle to building wealth is not access to investments, it is behavior. Human psychology often works against long-term financial success. People become emotional when money is involved. They panic when markets fall. They chase trends when prices rise. They buy investments during excitement and sell them during fear. This emotional cycle is responsible for many financial losses. During market booms, people rush to invest because everyone around them is making money. But when markets crash, fear spreads quickly. Prices fall, investors panic, and many sell their assets at the worst possible moment. Experienced investors behave differently. They expect markets to rise and fall. They understand that volatility is a normal part of investing. Instead of reacting emotionally, they focus on long-term value. This ability to remain calm during financial uncertainty is one of the most important skills in investing. The habits of wealthy investors. Successful investors rarely rely on luck. Instead, they develop habits that allow them to consistently grow their wealth over time. One of the most important habits is long-term thinking. While many people focus on short-term profits, wealthy investors focus on where industries and markets will be years from now. They ask questions like, what technologies will dominate the future? Which companies will lead entire industries? What economic trends will shape the next decade? This long-term perspective allows them to invest early in powerful trends. Another important habit is continuous learning. Financial markets are constantly changing. New industries emerge, technologies disrupt old business models, regulations evolve. Successful investors spend time studying these changes. They read financial reports, analyze business strategies, and follow economic developments around the world. This constant learning helps them make better investment decisions. Discipline is another critical habit. Investing requires patience. Some investments take years to deliver meaningful results. But investors who stay disciplined often benefit from compounding returns over long periods of time. The power of patience. Perhaps the most underrated investment skill is patience. In a world filled with fast information and instant gratification, patience can feel difficult. But wealth often grows slowly before it grows quickly. In the early years, investment growth may appear modest. A portfolio may increase gradually. But as compounding continues, growth begins accelerating. This is why many investors see the largest gains later in life. The financial snowball becomes larger each year. Even the famous investor, Warren Buffett, earned the majority of his wealth after the age of 60. His success was not the result of sudden breakthroughs. It was the result of decades of patient investing. Time allowed his investments to compound into one of the largest fortunes in modern history. How the rich protect their wealth. Building wealth is one challenge. Protecting it is another. Once investors accumulate large fortunes, they begin focusing heavily on preservation. Diversification becomes even more important. Wealthy investors spread their assets across different industries, markets, and asset classes. They may hold stocks, real estate, private companies, bonds, intellectual property, and alternative investments. This diversification reduces the impact of economic downturns. If one market struggles, other investments may continue performing well. Wealthy investors also rely heavily on professional advisors, financial planners, tax specialists, legal experts. These professionals help structure investments in ways that reduce taxes, protect assets, and manage risk. Major financial institutions such as JP Chase, Morgan Stanley, provide wealth management services designed specifically for high net worth individuals. These services help wealthy clients preserve and expand their fortunes across generations.
The role of time. Time is perhaps the most powerful resource in investing. Money invested early has far more time to grow. Even small investments can become significant if given enough time. This is why many wealthy individuals begin investing as early as possible. They understand that the sooner money begins working, the greater the long-term results. A person who invests consistently for 30 years often builds far more wealth than someone who starts later with larger amounts. Because time allows compounding to perform its magic. This is why many financial experts describe time as the most valuable asset in investing. Why assets create true freedom. At its core, wealth is not just about money. It is about freedom. Freedom to choose how to spend your time. Freedom to pursue ideas and opportunities. Freedom from constant financial stress. Assets provide this freedom because they generate income without requiring constant labor. A rental property produces rent. Stocks generate dividends and growth. Businesses create profits. Intellectual property earns royalties. Each asset becomes part of a financial engine that produces resources over time. As these assets grow, the owner gains greater control over their financial future. Instead of relying entirely on employment income, they rely on systems they own. This shift from labor to ownership is one of the defining characteristics of wealth. The final lesson. If there is one lesson shared by nearly every wealthy investor, it is this: wealth is built through ownership, not just income. Ownership. Ownership of businesses, ownership of investments, ownership of assets that grow and generate income. The more valuable assets a person owns, the more their financial power increases. And when those assets are combined with patience, discipline, and knowledge, they can create extraordinary results. Final cinematic outro. In the end, the path to wealth is not a mystery. It has been followed by investors for generations. They study opportunities, they invest in assets, they remain patient during uncertainty, and over time, their financial systems grow stronger. The 10 investments we explored today have helped shape some of the largest fortunes in history, but they are not reserved only for billionaires. Anyone who understands how assets work can begin building wealth step by step, because wealth is rarely built overnight. It is built through decisions, through patience, and through the power of investments working quietly over time. The earlier that journey begins, the more powerful the results can become. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how wealthy investors build their fortunes, make sure you subscribe for more financial documentaries. On this channel, we break down the rise and fall of powerful companies, hidden financial systems, and the strategies used by the world's richest investors. Because once you understand how money truly works, you begin to see the world very differently.